boys and girls. This is Mrs. Thompson. I'm Mrs. Draper's mom, if you didn't know that before. And I'm happy to talk with you today. And I've come to do something special with you today. This is a very special week. This is called, it's a very big word, Constitution Week. And Constitution is a really big word. Can you say it with me? Constitution. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But first, I would like to show you my dress. It's very long, as you can see. And ladies used to wear dresses like this all the time. Can you imagine that? It's hard to walk in. I wouldn't want to wear it all the time because I'm afraid I would fall. I would step on it and fall. And little girls used to wear dresses like this too. But do you know what? It's hard to go down the sliding board when you're wearing a long dress like this. And I'm so glad that girls don't have to wear long dresses anymore. But today I'm going to talk to you about rules. Do you have rules at school, on your computer school? I know Ms. Draper has told you some rules about being a good listener and raising your hand when you have something to say. And also that you should, another rule is that you should pay attention and look at the computer screen when you have something you want to say. We have rules about a lot of things. We have rules at home. Do you have rules in your family? Rules like maybe not hitting your brother or sister, or maybe bring your supplies with you when you come to your computer school. Do you have rules about keeping your toys picked up and put away? Do you have a rule about minding your mother and father, doing what they tell you to do? Do you know why we have rules? We have rules so that everybody can be happy and safe. If we didn't have rules, we probably wouldn't be very safe all the time. So we need rules to help us be happy and safe. Well, today, because it's Constitution Week, we want to talk about rules and laws. We have rules with our state where we live. We have city rules, but we call them laws when it's our city or our state. We live in the state of Florida, and we have laws that tell us what we can do, what we shouldn't do to be happy and safe. So our Constitution in the United States is our big, big body of laws so everybody will be happy and safe. And today I want to read you a story about a lawmaker, and his name was George Washington, and this is his book, a book about him. George Washington, you've probably heard about him. He was our very first president. And he wore a special kind of clothes, not a long dress like I have on, but he wore short pants with knee stockings that came up to his knees. He wore a special kind of hat. But he was our very first president, and our president is our leader of our country, the United States. This book is called George Washington, Our First President, and this author of this book is Garnett Jackson, and the illustrator is Cornelius Von Wright, and a second illustrator, whose name is Ying Hua Hu. Two illustrators for this book. So you watch while I read. George Washington, and he liked to ride horses. He was a very good horseman. George Washington by George Jackson. It was a cold winter morning on February 22nd, 1732. This was more than 200 years ago. Inside a Virginia farmhouse where it was warm and cozy, a special baby boy was born. The baby's name was George Washington. As little George Washington grew up, he loved the farm where he lived, and he loved all the animals on the farm. But most of all, he loved the horse. Best of all, he loved the horses. George had two older brothers who lived away. He lived with a younger sister and three younger brothers. They followed George everywhere he went, and they did everything he did. They all said, "Oh, okay, let's play follow the leader." And George will be the leader, of course, because George was the oldest one. Samuel and Charles said, "Oh, yes, George will be the leader." George went to a small country school. He worked very hard. He didn't have a computer because there was no such thing as computers when George was a boy. He was one of the smartest students in the school. George was also the most honest boy in the school. He grew up very fast. He was bigger and taller than all of the other boys. Everyone thought George was just wonderful. And sometimes George would choose the games for his classmates to play. And they always said, George will be our leader.
Show the picture.
In school, George liked to read and he liked to write. But he liked numbers best of all. So he liked math. But he liked to make maps and measure the land best of all. That was his favorite thing to do. And this was called surveying. And he used to measure his father's garden to see how big the garden was. And he practiced measuring the land in his father's garden. Many farmers wanted George to survey their land because they said he could do many things. And it would help them to know how many seeds to plant in their garden when it was time to plant their gardens. So George was only a boy of 16, and the other farmers just trusted George because he was so smart about measuring the land. So he would measure the land for all the farmers that lived near them. And they knew he was very smart and honest. They said, he will do a perfect job, one farmer said to another. George's big brother Lawrence took George on a long surveying trip to the Virginia wilderness. Now, a wilderness is where there are not many people living, but there are lots of wild animals and trees. And they stayed many days, many cold and rainy days and nights in the wilderness. There were many wild animals there, and George learned how to take care of himself in the woods. And he liked being in the woods. Living in the wilderness helped George to become an even greater leader. And when he was only 20 years old, he became a major in the Virginia Army. And then he became a colonel in the Army. One day, George met a lovely lady. Her name was Martha Custis. She was a widow. That means her husband had died, and she had 2 children. And you know what? They fell in love, and they got married in 1759. And George and Martha had lots of parties. They moved into a beautiful mansion, a beautiful home in Mount Vernon, Virginia. They had lots of parties, and there were people always in their house laughing and having fun in their home. And George and Martha were very popular. But Colonel Washington was soon called in to war again. It was 1775, and America was a very small country then, with only 13 colonies. They're kind of like states. But during this time, England ruled America. And England was way across the Atlantic Ocean. And the rulers in England, the king, were not treating the Americans very nicely. They wanted America to pay unfair, high taxes. And a war broke out. And the Americans chose George Washington as their leader. The war lasted 8 years, and the Colonel George Washington, was now General George Washington, and he led the American colonies to winning the war. America was no longer ruled by England. They were their own country. We were our own country, and the colonies became not colonies anymore, but the United States of America. And Americans were very happy. But the new little country needed a leader, and just guess who they chose. Everyone in the land wanted one and only one man for that job, and that was George Washington, General George Washington. So they made him the first president of the United States on April 30th, 1789. And on the day that George was to become the president, they called it, he had a ceremony, and they called it the inauguration. And President George Washington rode into town on a beautiful white horse on his way to the ceremony. Hooray, 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 all the people cheered when President Washington stood before them to give a speech. Some people were so happy that they even cried. Have you ever cried because you were so happy? That's what they did. Well, President Washington was a great president. He traveled all over America to see what the country needed. He passed good laws to help America and to help American people. But pretty soon, George Washington was president for 8 years. And after that, he went back to his farm and his beautiful home in Mount Vernon. And he enjoyed many good times and laughter again with Martha and with his family and with his friends. And they lived happily. And the Americans will never forget the first president of their land. And what was his name? His name was George Washington. And did you notice that Martha had a long dress like my long dress? And she had a little thing on her head called a dust cap. I hope you enjoyed the story about George Washington, boys and girls. It was true. And I know a really good song about George Washington and his hat. Did you notice his hat? It's called a tricorn, boys and girls, and that's because it has 3 corners on it. Miss Draper later can tell you why he had a hat that had 3 corners on it. All the men wore a 3-cornered hat. And the name of the song is, My Hat, It Has 3 Corners, or My 3-Cornered Hat. And it goes like this. My hat, it has 3 corners. 3 corners has my hat. And had it not 3 corners, it would not be my hat. And I like this song because it has motions to it. And you can do it with me if you want to try. It goes like this. My hat, it has 3 corners. 3 corners has my hat. And had it not 3 corners, it would not be my hat. You see what I did there? I said, this is hat, and it has 3, I use my elbow for a corner. It has 3 corners. And if I did not have it, it would not be my hat. You think you want to try that with me now? Let's sing it together. Maybe Miss Draper will sing with us this time. My hat, it has 3 corners. 3 corners has my hat. And had it not 3 corners, it would not be my hat. And I got mixed up. I'm very sorry about that, boys and girls. I hope I didn't get you mixed up too. This time, I'm going to sing all the words, but I'm going to leave off one of the motions. Instead of saying mine, I'm just going to use and not say the word. Is that how we do that, Miss Draper?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
Here we go. Try it with me, Miss Draper.
Hat, it has 3 corners. 3 corners has hat. And had it not 3 corners, it would not be hat.
This time, really hard now, we're going to leave off the word for my and for hat. And we're just going to say, it has. Can you do that with me? Try it.
It has 3 corners. 3 corners has. And had it not 3 corners, it would not be.
Really hard now. We're going to leave off my, hat, and 3. And I get very confused sometimes.
I do too.
Here we go.
It has corners. Corners has. And had it not corners, it would not be.
You did a really good job, Miss Draper. This time we're going to leave off all the words and just do the signs. Well, not all the words, but all the words that have a sign too. Here we go. 1, 2, 3.
It has. And had it not, it would not be.
Thank you, boys and girls. I hope you enjoyed today because I really enjoyed doing it for you. I hope I get to see you another time. Bye now.